In the shadows of ancient Egypt, a young Hebrew stood out among the slaves, challenging not only fate but also the hidden desires of a powerful official. Potiphar, the man who held control over Joseph, was known for his strength, but few know that his story is filled with nuances and twists. What really happened between them? Could Potiphar have changed his identity, or does the story we know hide deeper truths? As the sands of time shift, unsettling curiosities arise. Why would such a powerful woman be interested in a mere slave? And what does this reveal about human nature? As events unfold, we are led to question, how far do the limits of desire and ambition extend? Prepare to dive into a narrative that challenges conventions and provokes reflection. What lies behind the doors of Potiphar's palace? Come discover the true story that the Bible tells us, where every detail can alter our understanding of the past and what it means for the future. When we talk about Potiphar and Joseph, we are immediately transported to an ancient Egypt filled with traditions, hierarchies, and a culture that both fascinated and intrigued. Potiphar, an official of the pharaoh, was a prominent figure in this context, someone who held a privileged position and consequently influence and power. The story unfolds at a time when Egypt was a powerhouse in the ancient world, surrounded by mysteries, religious practices, and a rigidly stratified society. The pharaoh's administration was composed of individuals like Potiphar, who not only served as officials, but also as guardians of a rich and complex culture. Joseph, on the other hand, brings a different perspective. He was a Hebrew sold into slavery by his own brothers, carrying with him the story of a family struggling to survive in a hostile environment. The contrast between Joseph's condition and Potiphar's position is striking. While one is a slave, the other is a man of power and prestige. This dichotomy is crucial to the narrative, as it illustrates how relationships of power and status can be fluid, depending on circumstances. Their story is not just about individuals. It reflects a time when family ties, betrayal, and ambition intertwine in unexpected ways. Moreover, the relationship between Potiphar and Joseph is a microcosm of Egyptian society at the time. Egypt was known for its efficient administration and an economy based on agricultural practices and trade. Potiphar, as an official, was likely involved in security and justice issues, maintaining order in a society that valued stability. For Joseph, working for Potiphar was not just a matter of survival, but also an opportunity to rise in what initially seemed like a hostile environment. This dynamic of dominator and dominated highlights the complexity of social relations during that era. Historians often reflect on how the narrative of Genesis fits into this historical context. Joseph's transition from slave to a position of trust in Potiphar's house is not merely a dramatic twist. It is a testament to the fluidity of power and the influence individuals can wield, even in adverse situations. Therefore, Potiphar's figure is not just an antagonist, but a symbol of an era where fortune and ability could change a person's fate almost overnight. Thus, their story becomes a portrait of a vibrant Egypt, where history, culture, and human relationships intertwine. The Genesis narrative presents a complex relationship between Potiphar and Joseph, marked by nuances that go beyond what appears at first glance. Potiphar, as Joseph's master, embodies authority, but also the vulnerability that accompanies power. Joseph, in turn, is a figure who, despite his status as a slave, possesses a strong character and remarkable intelligence. The relationship between the two unfolds in an environment of distrust and expectation, where each has their own interests and motivations. By analyzing this dynamic, we ultimately see that the story is a study of influence and the consequences of the choices we make. While Potiphar trusts Joseph, he also lives under the shadow of what could be betrayal. The narrative shows us that Joseph excels in his duties, gaining his master's trust. This rise is not only a matter of skill, but also of character. Joseph embodies the ideal faithful servant, dedicated to his work and concerned for his master's well-being. However, this relationship of trust is tested when Potiphar's wife enters the scene, introducing an element of tension that provokes a twist in the narrative. The loyalty of Joseph will be put to the test, and it is this conflict that makes the story so captivating. Additionally, the interaction between Potiphar and Joseph reflects the dynamics of power that permeate the narrative. Potiphar is a figure who, while exercising control, is also vulnerable to the circumstances surrounding him. The trust he places in Joseph ultimately becomes a double-edged sword. He may have believed he was in control of his household and his life, but the arrival of temptation, represented by his wife, alters this dynamic. Joseph's moral strength ultimately defines the course of the story, but not without dramatic consequences for all involved. It is also interesting to note how this relationship can be viewed through the lens of rise and fall narratives. Joseph, who begins as a slave, rises to become Potiphar's trusted man, only to have that achievement threatened. What could be a story of success transforms into a tale of betrayal and injustice. The way Potiphar reacts to what happens reveals much about his own nature and the social norms of the time. The relationship between them, therefore, serves as a microcosm of life's complexities, where expectations and reality often collide in unexpected ways. The figure of Potiphar, although often overshadowed by Joseph's importance in the narrative, carries a wealth of interpretations that deserve exploration. Traditionally, Potiphar is seen as a man of influence and power, an official of Pharaoh representing order and structure in Egypt. However, this interpretation can be expanded when we consider the nuances of his personality and motivations. He is frequently portrayed as an antagonist, but this view can be limiting, as Potiphar is also a victim of the circumstances surrounding him. On the other hand, the way Potiphar handles the situation with Joseph and his wife raises questions about his own morality and character. He is a man who, even in a position of power, finds himself confronted with betrayal and disloyalty. Potiphar's response to the situation reveals the fragility of trust and the complexity of human relationships. Rather than simply being a villain, he can be seen as a man who, as the situation unfolds, finds himself in a difficult position, forced to make choices that may not reflect his true character. Furthermore, interpretations of Potiphar can vary depending on cultural and historical context. In some traditions, he is viewed as a symbol of oppressive power, while in others, he may be seen as a man simply adhering to the social norms of the time. This duality makes Potiphar a character rich in complexity and nuance. He embodies the struggle between duty and morality, a theme that resonates in many narratives throughout history. It is also interesting to note how the representation of Potiphar has changed over the centuries. In literary and artistic works, he is often depicted in ways that reflect the concerns of the times in which these works were created. For example, in some modern adaptations, Potiphar may be portrayed as an insecure man whose position of power is threatened by Joseph's boldness. These contemporary interpretations provide a new perspective on a character who, at first glance, may seem one-dimensional. Ultimately, Potiphar's figure invites us to reflect on the nature of power and its implications. He is a man who, despite his status and influence, finds himself ensnared in a web of intrigue and betrayal. The story of him and Joseph is not just about an individual struggle, but also about social dynamics and the complexities of human relationships. Thus, Potiphar emerges not just as a character, but as a symbol of the tensions that permeate life in society. Potiphar's role as an official of Pharaoh is crucial for understanding the narrative of Joseph and his own trajectory. As a prominent man in Egypt, Potiphar not only symbolizes authority and power, but also represents the political and social structure that shapes the lives of the characters. His position as an official implies a series of responsibilities, including overseeing others, managing resources, and protecting social order. This places him in a position where every decision can have significant consequences, both for himself and those around him. Moreover, Potiphar's status as an official of Pharaoh highlights the interconnectedness of power and morality. He lives in a world where loyalty to the Pharaoh and adherence to social norms are essential. This loyalty is tested when his wife attempts to seduce Joseph, placing Potiphar in a delicate position. His reaction to the betrayal is not only a reflection of his individual character, but also of the expectations and norms governing his life as an official. This complexity makes Potiphar a fascinating character, whose importance extends beyond being merely Joseph's master. On the other hand, Potiphar's position raises questions about the nature of power in such a stratified society. He is an influential man, yet he is also a product of a system that limits his options. When confronted with his wife's actions and Joseph's loyalty, the narrative of Joseph in Egypt presents one of the most intriguing moments: Potiphar's wife's attempt to seduce Joseph. Here we have a young man who, despite all the adversities he faces, stands out for his beauty and integrity. Potiphar's wife, identifying with Joseph's attractive figure, does not hesitate to try to seduce him. This moment can be interpreted in various ways, but to me, it represents an interesting dynamic of power and desire. The woman, as the wife of a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court, holds a position of authority, but her attraction to Joseph reveals a vulnerability that makes her even more human. Her insistence on seducing Joseph is a testament to what desire can do to people. Joseph, on the other hand, is portrayed as someone who, despite temptation, maintains his morals and principles. He does not succumb to the offer, refusing to transgress not only social norms, but also the trust that his master has placed in him. This refusal is noteworthy, as it shows us that personal integrity can be more powerful than temptation. In fact, it is what distinguishes Joseph in this scenario of seduction. The way Potiphar's wife approaches Joseph is significant. She does not settle for a mere flirtation. Her approach is direct, almost demanding. This not only demonstrates her determination, but also points to an unequal power dynamic. Joseph is a slave, and Potiphar's wife, in her position as the wife of an influential man, uses this power relationship to attempt to exert control over him. However, Joseph does not allow himself to be intimidated. His response is filled with firmness and dignity, which in my opinion gives new meaning to the idea of resistance. Furthermore, this attempt at seduction is not only a turning point in Joseph's life, but also serves as a reflection of Potiphar's wife's emotional complexities. She finds herself trapped in a life that, despite its luxury and status, lacks something essential. Her pursuit of Joseph can be interpreted as a quest for freedom, for a love that transcends social conventions. Yet, this quest ultimately leads her down a path of despair and eventually betrayal. In the end, the attempt at seduction culminates in a series of events that change the course of Joseph's life. Not only does she try to seduce him, but frustrated by his refusal, she ends up accusing him of assault. This twist raises an interesting question. What happens when temptation turns into betrayal? The narrative shows us that the consequences can be devastating, not only for Joseph, but also for Potiphar's wife and her husband. It serves as a reminder that often the choices made in moments of weakness can have repercussions far beyond what we imagine. The story of Potiphar and Joseph is rich in nuances, especially concerning gender and sexuality. Potiphar's wife's role is frequently analyzed through the lens of seduction and betrayal, but there is much more to consider. The way the narrative addresses female sexuality, for instance, is revealing. Potiphar's wife is portrayed as a powerful figure, yet in her search for satisfaction, she is almost seen as a villain. This dichotomy raises questions about how female sexuality is perceived and treated in biblical narratives. Joseph, on the other hand, represents a masculinity that is both vulnerable and strong. His resistance to Potiphar's wife's seduction is often viewed as an example of male virtue, but it can also be seen as a form of repression. What does this tell us about gender roles? The expectation that men should resist temptation places added pressure on masculinity, suggesting that a man's worth is directly tied to his ability to stand firm in the face of desire. This narrative may reflect the social norms that permeate our own culture. The relationship between these two characters can also be viewed as a representation of power and control. Potiphar's wife, in her position, seems to possess control, but her need to seduce Joseph reveals an insecurity. On the other hand, Joseph, even in his status as a slave, holds a form of moral power. The dynamic between them challenges the idea that power is always associated with a high social position. It sparks an interesting conversation about how masculinity and femininity can be shaped and distorted by social expectations. Additionally, the narrative touches on issues of unrequited desire. Potiphar's wife, in her attempt to seduce Joseph, reveals a facet of feminine desire that is often overlooked: the longing for a genuine connection that transcends the physical. Her frustration and eventual betrayal are consequences of a quest for something unattainable in her marriage. This prompts us to reflect on what sexuality truly means and how it intertwines with identity and power in a context of oppression. Ultimately, the interpretation of gender and sexuality in the story of Potiphar and Joseph invites us to reconsider the stereotypes surrounding both characters. Potiphar's wife is frequently demonized, while Joseph is seen as a hero. However, this simplistic view ignores the complexities of their experiences. The biblical narrative, rich and profound, challenges us to rethink how we perceive desire, temptation, and gender dynamics, not only in the ancient context, but also in our contemporary reality. When I think of the story of Potiphar and Joseph, I cannot help but consider the deep symbolism that permeates the narrative, especially concerning dreams and betrayal. Dreams play a fundamental role in Joseph's life, reflecting his aspirations and the destiny that awaits him. However, these dreams are also intertwined with the betrayal he faces, creating a fascinating duality. The dreams, which initially bring hope, eventually morph into a kind of nightmare when betrayal becomes a reality in his life. Joseph's dreams are more than mere visions. They are premonitions of greatness and success. Yet as the plot unfolds and he finds himself ensnared in Potiphar's wife's seductive web, betrayal becomes a shadow threatening to extinguish those dreams. The symbolism here is powerful. Betrayal is not merely an act of personal disloyalty, but a force that can undermine all the potential one possesses. This leads me to ponder how many times in real life we are confronted with betrayals that divert us from our own dreams and goals. When Joseph resists Potiphar's wife's advances, he is not only defending his honor, but also fighting to keep his dreams alive. The subsequent betrayal, marked by false accusations, represents an attempt to destroy what Joseph symbolizes. This raises an interesting question. To what extent are dreams intertwined with an individual's morality and integrity? The narrative suggests that to achieve our goals, we often need to confront betrayals and challenges that test our resolve. The symbolism of dreams can also be seen as a reflection of hope. Even when Joseph is unjustly accused and imprisoned, his dreams are not entirely obliterated. There is a resilience that permeates his journey. This brings forth the idea that even amid betrayal and adversity, hope can serve as a beacon, guiding us. Joseph's dream, which initially seems distant, ultimately comes to fruition when he becomes second in command in Egypt. It testifies that, even in the face of the most painful betrayals, human potential can shine. Conversely, betrayal can also be viewed as a factor of transformation. Joseph's experiences in Potiphar's house and his subsequent imprisonment shape and prepare him for future challenges. The betrayal by Potiphar's wife, while devastating, becomes a necessary step in Joseph's journey toward realizing his dreams. This transformation through betrayal is a powerful idea that resonates in many narratives, not only in the Bible, but also in stories of overcoming adversity found in various cultures. In summary, the symbolism of dreams and betrayal in the narrative of Potiphar and Joseph invites us to reflect on human nature and the complexity of interpersonal relationships. Dreams can be a source of hope, but they are also vulnerable to external factors such as betrayal. This duality challenges us to consider how we handle our own betrayals, and how, even in the face of difficulties, we can find a path to realizing our dreams. When analyzing the story of Potiphar and Joseph, I cannot help but compare it with other biblical narratives that also address temptation and fall. The Bible is full of stories that explore the limits of morality and the consequences of choices. When I think of Potiphar's wife, I cannot overlook how her presence in the narrative is often eclipsed by Joseph's figure. After all, she is a character who, despite playing a crucial role in the plot, is frequently reduced to a mere antagonist. But why does this happen? It is interesting to note that she is not just a symbol of temptation, but also a woman with her own desires and motivations. Her position as the wife of a high-ranking official in Pharaoh's court places her in a context of power and influence, yet also of loneliness and dissatisfaction. Your search for Joseph can be seen as a reflection of your personal and social frustrations. Moreover, Potiphar's wife represents an emotional complexity that often goes unnoticed. In her attempts to seduce Joseph, she is not merely acting on impulse or carnal desire. She is also seeking to assert her own agency in a world that limits her due to her status as a woman. The narrative portrays her as a woman who does not passively accept her situation, but rather fights for something she considers desirable. This struggle, although morally questionable, prompts us to reflect on the dynamics of power between genders in ancient society, and why not, in contemporary societies as well. When she finds herself rejected by Joseph, her reaction is a mix of anger and revenge. Here we see the darker side of her personality, as her frustration over not getting what she wanted leads her to unjustly accuse him. This action not only destroys Joseph's life, but also reveals the fragility of Potiphar's wife's position. She becomes a tragic figure, someone who, in her attempt to exercise her will, ends up becoming an agent of destruction, even if unintentionally. This duality in her character makes her a fascinating figure deserving of deeper analysis. Potiphar's wife can also be viewed through a feminist lens, which questions narratives that perpetuate gender stereotypes. In many interpretations, she is seen as a seductive villain, but this viewpoint overlooks the social context surrounding her. Patriarchy is a central element in her story, and her actions can be interpreted as an attempt to subvert the norms that oppress her. Rather than simply being a seductress, she can be seen as a woman who, in her quest for autonomy, crosses boundaries that were considered sacred in her time. Ultimately, Potiphar's wife is not just a figure of temptation or betrayal. She is a symbol of the complexities of gender relations. Her story resonates across many cultures, where women continue to fight against oppression and injustice. She reminds us that even in the oldest narratives, issues of desire, power, and agency are universal and timeless. What happens to her after accusing Joseph serves as a reminder that often the consequences of our actions can be broad and unexpected. When I look at the influence of the story of Potiphar and Joseph in popular culture, I cannot help but notice how this biblical narrative has rooted itself in various forms of art and expression. From plays to films, the relationship between these two characters has become a symbol of temptation and morality. A clear example is the musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which, although it takes a lighthearted approach, still deals with profound themes such as betrayal, loyalty, and redemption. This adaptation shows how the narrative can be reinterpreted and redefined, reaching audiences of all ages. Additionally, the story is often used as a metaphor in contemporary debates about ethics and morality. In many contexts, Joseph's figure is seen as a model of resistance in the face of temptation, while Potiphar's wife represents the traps that can arise in our lives. This dichotomy between good and evil, temptation and virtue, is a narrative that resonates across many cultures, becoming a reference in discussions about character and moral decisions. In times of ethical crisis, the story is evoked as a reminder that the choices we make often have lasting consequences. In literature, the story of Potiphar and Joseph is frequently explored in novels and short stories that address themes of betrayal, desire, and redemption. This ancient narrative is adapted to reflect the complexities of human relationships, bringing new perspectives on the characters. Contemporary authors have drawn on this story to develop plots that explore not only morality, but also social issues, such as the struggle for power and the search for identity in a world that is often hostile. Thus, the story transforms into a means to discuss relevant and current topics. The influence of the narrative also extends to music and cinema, where themes of forbidden love and betrayal are explored in innovative ways. Films that deal with complicated relationships often reference the story of Potiphar and Joseph, using it as a foundation to build their plots. This cultural resonance shows how the biblical narrative continues to inspire and provoke reflection, even in modern and diverse contexts. In conclusion, the story of Potiphar and Joseph teaches us that ancient narratives have the power to transcend time and space. They adapt to contemporary realities, allowing new generations to reflect on universal issues such as power, desire, and morality. Through popular culture, this story remains alive, showing that even in a constantly changing world, the lessons we can learn from the past remain relevant. Nowadays, studies on gender and sexuality in the Bible have gained prominence and relevance, allowing for a new reading of texts that were once considered absolute. The story of Potiphar and Joseph is a perfect example of how contemporary analysis can illuminate aspects that were previously neglected. The figure of Potiphar's wife, for instance, can be reinterpreted through the lens of feminist theories, which seek to understand the role of women in biblical narratives and question how they are portrayed. This type of analysis enriches our understanding of the story and provides new perspectives on the dynamics of power between genders. One of the most interesting aspects to explore in these studies is how power and sexuality are depicted in the biblical text. Potiphar's wife's attempt to seduce Joseph can be seen as a reflection of the gender tensions present in the society of the time. Female sexuality, often repressed, finds expression in her character, who, in seeking what she desires, challenges patriarchal norms. This reading leads us to a broader questioning of how sexuality is treated in the Bible and how it relates to the experiences of women in contemporary contexts. Furthermore, analyzing the Genesis narrative from a queer perspective also offers valuable insights. The relationship between Potiphar, his wife, and Joseph can be viewed as a representation of the complexities of human sexuality that go beyond the heteronormative binary. Potiphar's wife's attraction to Joseph can be interpreted as a transgression of gender norms, while Joseph's resistance to her seduction positions him as a figure of virtue in a context of temptation. These aspects make the narrative even richer and worthy of analysis. Contemporary studies have also focused on how interpretations of the Bible influence social norms and expectations around sexuality. The way the story of Potiphar and Joseph is told and retold shapes how people understand gender relations and power dynamics in their own lives. By questioning traditional narratives, scholars are helping to create space for a more inclusive and diverse understanding of human experiences, recognizing the multiplicity of identities and orientations. Ultimately, the story of Potiphar and Joseph is a fertile ground for reflection on gender and sexuality, offering an opportunity to reevaluate the norms and values that shape our lives. Contemporary studies encourage us to look beyond traditional interpretations and consider how these stories still resonate in our current world. This new approach not only enriches our understanding of the narrative, but also helps us create a space for more open and inclusive discussions about sexuality and identity. The narrative of Potiphar and Joseph, found in the book of Genesis, has had a significant impact on Christian theology and morality throughout the centuries. The story is often used as an example of virtue and resistance to temptation, particularly in the figure of Joseph, who refuses to yield to Potiphar's wife's advances. This resistance is seen as a model of moral behavior, widely preached in sermons and Christian teachings. Joseph's act of not succumbing to temptation is celebrated as an example of integrity and faith, highlighting the importance of morality in a world filled with ethical challenges. And now we come to a crucial point in this fascinating narrative. Imagine the scene. Potiphar, a man of power, faces a young man full of vigor and integrity. The Bible does not provide all the details, but the tension is palpable. What really happened in that palace? Desire, ambition, betrayal, all of this makes us reflect on human nature. Have you ever stopped to think about how each choice we make can reflect our true intentions? Potiphar and Joseph are not just characters, they represent dilemmas that we all face in our lives. Could it be that true change lies in our perceptions? What if Potiphar had to confront his own insecurities? In the end, Joseph's story teaches us about resilience and the struggle between good and evil. But what does that mean for us today? How can we apply these lessons in our daily lives? Let's continue this conversation in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell, because we have many more intriguing stories ahead. And who knows, the next one might reveal secrets you never imagined.